So next, we'll be talking about more of the data collection component. So my name is Ryan, as I mentioned before. I was fortunate enough to work with Colorado Parks and Wildlife on a project with Stacy Lichka, Heather Johnson, and my advisor, Jessica Young, assessing the potential bias in reported conflict in Durango, Colorado. Excuse me. So just to give a little idea, human black bear interactions occur in lots of different forms, a lot of different areas. You know, we have people that are walking in the woods and they'll see a black bear, or there'll be a bear that's just walking across your lawn. You have interactions more of bears getting into trash, getting into fruit trees, breaking through fences, even to the point of bears going into homes, or even threatening your pet or trying to attack you and things like that. So there's a lot of different interactions that happen with black bears. And even with each of these different interactions that I've talked about can necessitate someone to reflect and have a different evaluation of black bears as a whole. So let's say, you know, I'm somebody that just sees a black bear crossing my lawn or going through across my driveway. I might think that's really, really interesting, or I've never seen a black bear before, and I think that's awesome, and I really value seeing that wildlife experience, or having that wildlife experience, versus somebody else who has maybe never seen a black bear before. They also might see the situation and be like, holy crap, my dog's gonna get attacked, or my kids might get hurt, so I need to bring them in. So there is this idea that people are gonna report, or gonna talk about, or have feelings towards interactions differently based on your interpretation or evaluation of the situation. And this, depending on your interaction, you might be inclined to contact an agency to be like, hey, I saw this black bear, I just want to let you know that it's happening, or the fact that I want you to come take care of this situation because I'm worried about X, Y, and Z. So reporting to an agency, whether it's Colorado Parks and Wildlife or some of these other organizations, basically these people pick up the phone and they get information like the type of conflict, whether it's just walking through town or it's getting into my trash, get the time, the date, and some of the most important information is the location. You know, the exact location of where it's occurring. And then what this information is used for is to assess actual conflict. You know, they want to know, and wildlife managers will use this information to, you know, get an idea of where conflict is happening with black bears, you know, the actual location, the frequency, and kind of can see trends over time. And then they use that to potentially assess, you know, using techniques to reduce conflict. You know, for example, if we find that there's a lot of reported conflict in a small area, we might try to put in educational tools, or we might put bear-resistant trash cans, and then see how successful those are by potentially the reduction of reports. In some states, they also use this information to assess the trends in black bear populations as well. And so, as I kind of mentioned earlier, there is this potential bias in why someone would report this conflict. And that kind of leads into my project objective, which was to really understand reported versus actual conflict on the ground. And how we were able to assess that was using garbage-related conflict. You know, that's something we can physically monitor versus some of those other interactions of breaking into houses or seeing it in the wild. There was not a really good way to monitor that. And from that, we created a spatial distribution of each of those across our study area. And then we wanted to understand the next question of why people report. You know, is it only because they have certain experiences? Is it because they don't like black bears at all? You know, getting at some of these, because we're wildlife managers, we really want to understand, we work with the public a lot that helps dictate some of our management decisions. So we really wanted to understand something like reporting. And as a side, or an additional step, you know, the reason we wanted to also look at this is because if there is a lack of overlap, we can maybe understand why there might be between reported and actual conflict. So in my study area, I was in Durango, Colorado. It is surrounded by public land. There's a lot of good habitat for black bears, but at the same time, there's also a great source of anthropogenic foods such as trash, birdseed, dog food, you know, fruit trees, all these things. So it really creates a unique situation that can, where we can try to look at the potential overlap between reported and actual And more specifically, I was in an area in Durango that's been known to have a high conflict with black bears. And so we have a north and south study area that's separated by the Animas River. And so that is the main focus of my study area. And each of these areas is a little different. So the north area is more home ownership. People that don't, have a lot of garages to store their trash, versus the south, which is more renters and has alleyway systems for trash. So there's some differences between the two, which kind of makes for a unique, just kind of figuring out what's causing people or actual conflict versus reported. But to get back to the first question, actual versus reported conflict. So that was my main focus for the project. And then in order to observe actual conflict, there was data collected from 2013 to 2015, from July to September. July through September is usually some of the peak time for conflict to actually occur, specifically to food resources like trash. Bears are going to know hyperphagic, where they're looking for a high calorie intake right before hibernation. So what I would do, I would drive up and down these roads and alleyways before garbage pickup to look for trash that's been knocked over by bears, and mark that with a GPS location, time, and everything like that, and then make a spatial distribution across the study area, as you can see. And then for reported conflict, for collecting that, I got it from 3 different sources: Colorado Parks and Wildlife, La Plata County Sheriff's Department, and a nonprofit organization that also monitors black bear conflict across the city. And from that information, I only used exact addresses. I didn't use anything that said just a street name, because I wanted a more accurate representation of reported conflict, and then plotted that same kind of idea where I just plotted it across the study area for representation. And then for data analysis, I created density maps, and I wanted to focus on 50 through 10%, because that's something that we felt that was actually usable by wildlife managers when they're trying to reduce conflict. Excuse me. They're going to want to, if we focused on something that was 95%, that would be the entire study area. That doesn't really help if you have very limited resources in actually trying to reduce conflict. For example, if you only have 100 bear-resistant trash cans, you're not going to be able to know exactly where the best places to put it. So we focused on areas that were a lot denser in point and locations of reported and or an actual, because if we have those, higher density and with those limited resources, we can be more effective in trying to actually use it. And then to analyze it, we created these maps, and then I took a area of overlap, so 50% for observed and 50% for reported, and did the area of intersect to see how much overlap there actually was. And so for the results, what we found is there actually is quite a bit of density, or the concentration of points for reported and observed. As you can kind of see in the southern area, we have higher densities. Just a little reference, the light green is 50% density, 40 is yellow, orange is 30, 20 is red-orange, and 10% is the highest density of points. But yeah, as you can see, the southern area has the highest density of points. But what we found is that, yes, reported conflict does overlap with actual conflict fairly well, especially at those higher density. The 50% and 40% not as much, so it might be a little hesitant to say that's a good measure or a good tool to use in that regard. Kind of the overall message for that is reported conflicts identifies actual conflict hotspots at higher densities. But as a side note, you might have noticed that, up in this northern area, the 50% doesn't really overlap as much. Reported is kind of all over the place, and observed or actual conflict is more in this area. So that kind of leads into the next question of why. Why is there not that overlap? So we got at that, if this will go, there we go. We got at that, trying to figure out why people report conflict. So our objective was to figure out, yes, people reported, or no, they did not. And we wanted to look at social and environmental factors And how we did that, we sent out a survey in 2012, getting a full sense of the people in Durango and 1,500 random people in the county that have experienced black bear conflict, understanding people's interactions and perspectives of black bears, as well as do you report conflict. So that was our dependent variable. Yes, you do, or no, you didn't. And from there, we did assess some social and environmental factors. And we also, so these are the factors that we looked at. We grouped them into categories to assess potential, some models that might be best fit for explaining why people report. And kind of, so it broke down into experience, tolerance, demographics, and environmental. Experience is something we base it on a consequence. So a low consequence is I see a black bear in the woods, or I'm calling for a bear, or I have some experience of seeing bears. Medium consequence is more that nuisance behavior, like bear getting into trash, getting into birdseed, things of that nature. And then high consequence is more black bears, threatening your pet, or you're being harassed or followed, and more of a physical issue or consequence. Tolerance is more of an overall attitude of black bears as a whole, which tends to be based, in some of the literature, it is based on perceived risk and perceived benefits of black bears, and there's a lot of other factors as well. Demographics, gender and age have been shown to predict reporting behaviors, and home ownership, we were curious because people might be more invested in their property and might call more because of that, versus someone who's renting that level more handle it. Environmental model is based on the probability of actually encountering a black bear. There's literature that says that housing density, distance to forest areas, and distance to rivers and streams increase your likelihood of actually encountering a black bear. So we wanted to know if that high potential risk of encountering a black bear would also increase your likelihood of reporting. And so we also did a combination of models of experience and tolerance and experience environmental, because we thought those together might be better predictors for reporting than done by themselves. And then we also included all these factors into a global model so that we could just see if, as well, just to kind of figure out if all of those matter. And we did that through using a logistic regression, and then model selection was done through AIC. And what we found is that experience and tolerance together is one of the best fit models. And then also the global model is also one of the best fit. We couldn't discern between the two. And then just specifically looking at the global model, our most significant factors were experiences, tolerance, and gender. So those were the most significant factors to explain who was or why people were reporting. So the take-home message from that is that increases in experience with black bears, increased tolerance, and women actually are reporting more, are the most significant factors for reporting behavior. So what this kind of take-home message is that wildlife managers can feel confident in using higher density of reported conflict to represent actual conflict. So that, which is really good, with limited resources, they can pick that 40 or 30, 20, and 10% areas, initiate a management plan to reduce conflict, and feel like, yes, we're going to be able to monitor the success of it. And maybe education works, maybe it doesn't, and then trying to figure out the best combination for that. Some of the next steps, as you could tell, the north and south were a little different, so we want to kind of segment those into different study areas completely and analyze that to see if there's more overlap in the south because of that, or there's, for some other reason, figuring out why there's less overlap in the north. And then to get back to it, the why people report, what it's showing is that, a situation, just because your house is near a more likely area that black bear interaction is going to occur, doesn't necessarily mean people are going to report conflict, where people's experiences are actually what drives people to report. For example, regardless of you have a low consequence, like you just see a bear, or you have a nuisance behavior situation, those are what drive people to report versus some of just where you're living specifically. Some of the next steps we kind of want to do is, more social factors that we would like to assess, not just tolerance, but do you trust wildlife managers to report? Do you feel you have personal control of the situation? Do you have, what's your perceived risks? Some things like that. But anyway, I'd like to thank all these people. Without them, there's no way I could have done any of this. And I'd like to thank again Stacy Lishka, Heather Johnson, and Jessica Young, because they pushed me very hard to figure everything out and learn more. But yeah, and I can take any questions. Yes.
You mentioned the steps in the context of we. So will you be staying on with Colorado Parks and Wildlife in Durango to see those next steps?
Yeah, so I'm going to be working in Durango this coming summer for it. It's the last. So I will be there this summer to kind of separate that out a little bit more. Try to understand. There's a couple more questions that we kind of want to ask, and just the way the data fell and everything else. So that's part of it as well. But yeah. Yeah.
What's going on with the project with the garbage cans that lock up and the compliance with that? Is that still happening or?
Yeah. So that's I'm a small part of that bigger question. So a very big part of it is figuring out if bear-resistant trash cans are effective in reducing conflict. And so I was an employee monitoring people that comply with locking up the trash cans, and that kind of stemmed into seeing if people aren't complying and say they're complying and things like that, like that led to, well, is reporting, do people report what they see or do they not, or how much does that actually represent actual conflict? But yeah, that's still going on. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Were there any specific methods to determine if, let's say, a trash was interrupted by a black bear versus another animal or the wind or anything?
Right, and that's a good question. So, there's actually no, perfect system to figure out if there's conflict. If the bear knocked over. Some of the tools if you see bear scat on the ground right next to it, there are some telltale signs that you can kind of make a good educated guess on it. For instance, raccoons or something, they're a little more dexterous, so they don't really rip into the trash as much, where bears are like messy and like it's all over the place. Another good indicator is, especially in those alleyways, you'll see a black bear, or not see, but see evidence where one trash can is over 10 meters down, another one. So it's signs like that which we use to assess it. And also, most of these trash cans are full, so a raccoon knocking it over is a little more difficult, but it's possible. But to be 100% confident, obviously not.
What kind of educational efforts are happening in terms of both dealing with the tolerance level and also addressing people's behavior in tracking bears?
Right, so a lot of what we were doing, or a lot of what I did when I was down there as well, is we did a canvassing event where we notifying everybody that we're notifying a lot of individuals, specifically in the study area, that this is the time to make sure you lock up your garbage cans, and also to realize bring in the dog food or whatever possible attractants. So that was a big part of that as well. Education, making sure that certain people, the potential of actually getting a bear-resistant trash can. So that was our big educational for the public. There's also nonprofits that do a lot of education as well, trying to help people out for understanding who to talk to and what to do and recording that information.
Did you see one?
Did I see a black bear? I did and I didn't. So for the actual project itself, like me going up and down trash cans, looking for trash, I only saw 3 for the 3 months, which I don't know if that's good or bad. But I saw one my first day, which was kind of impressive. But I also helped out with some trapping efforts to just monitor movements, so that I helped out with that.
What's the expectation from Colorado Parks and Wildlife? Do they want people to report every time they see a black bear?
Yes and no, because they're interested in trying to reduce conflict. So not necessarily. It's important to report things that may cause if they're monitoring for trash-related conflict, or they want to, I mean, they're going to want to know, you know, when someone has a break-in and things like that. But, I mean, because there's so much data that comes in, just seeing black bears, you know, that's a lot of time and effort, which is still important, but it's a tricky situation because they're with the limited resources. You know, you kind of want to focus your efforts in certain ways. Not that reporting, you know, you do want to encourage people to report, but at the same time, you know, I mean, it's kind of depending on the situation.